Our reading for today comes from John chapter 1, reading selected verses. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Out of his fullness we have all received grace in place of grace already given. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in closest relationship with the Father, has made him known. This is the word of the Lord. So I want to ask you, what was your Christmas like? Was Christmas, is Christmas all you'd hoped it would be? Often the perception is that Christmas is a thoroughly amazing time, but often for many people it isn't. And when we read the scriptures, we often think it was an absolutely amazing time for everyone involved. But not all of it was. Let me just share with you some of what we know about that first Christmas. Just think about it. There's a teenage girl, pregnant outside of marriage, in a strict religious community. Not exactly an excellent situation to be in. Dad, Joseph, knows he's not the real dad, not really buying into the "it's God's baby" deal. But then of course they, decide they're okay enough with it all, with what God's asking them to do, but then a census gets called. So off they go on a 130-kilometre walk from Nazareth to Bethlehem. And while we did, of course, have a donkey in the video we used for Christmas Day, there's no donkey actually mentioned in the Bible. Not in this occasion anyway. And it's quite unlikely that Mary and Joseph were able to afford a donkey. So, not exactly a nice walk for a pregnant lady. Then they show up, of course, in Bethlehem, and we know from the culture of the time, they didn't go into an inn, first of all. That's not how that would have worked. The literal word is a house, so they don't go into an inn, they go into a house. They go stay with Joseph's family. But Joseph's family aren't so keen on having them. But they have to put them in somewhere. So out the back with the animals for you, Joseph, and your pregnant fiancée. Even though you're having a baby. What a warm welcome. Maybe some of you have families like that. I don't know. I'm sorry if you do. But it happens, doesn't it? And then childbirth. A thoroughly amazing process that people really enjoy. Not. Amongst animals, no less. I don't think anyone that I know would want to give birth amongst animals. Then who should visit? A few short hours probably after Mary's given birth to Jesus, but complete strangers, people that Mary and Joseph do not know. You know what? Strangers were never on my list of people who I wanted to have come visit when my kids were born. But in come these strangers, and they're not just any strangers, they're shepherds who probably have zero clue about babies, zero clue about childbirth. Well, I guess they do have a clue about birth when it comes to animals. They're more at home in the stable, at least we know, than Mary and Joseph were. It seems like the only truly amazing thing about that first Christmas is actually Christ himself. God showing up as a baby. What an amazing thing. But when we read the story, we realize that Jesus doesn't actually do anything and seems to be the source of the stress in the first place. 2,000 years later, we celebrate this series of awkward, difficult events. Awkward and difficult events that God was in, but awkward and difficult nonetheless. You know, when we celebrate Christmas, it's often in a sanitized way. We struggle to put together the hard things and the amazing things. We often embrace the beauty, but avoid the ugly. Even though when we see the difficulty in that first Christmas, we have some sort of recognition that there's some similarities in our own lives. There are things that are great and things that are not so great. So when we look at that first Christmas, we see that things didn't necessarily get any better for Mary and Joseph. But what they did get was some really good news. God's son being born to them. Fantastic. Things didn't necessarily become any easier for them. Yet they did have God with them. Their lives weren't exactly more peaceful. Yet they did have a promise of peace. Life is often like this, isn't it? I'm sure you've experienced this in your own life, and we see it all through Scripture, that God's most amazing blessings often come when life is at its hardest. Some of the most amazing work that God does tells us that God is with us and at work, even if things aren't instantly better. You and I, we have a God who chooses to enter our lives at many of our worst possible moments. It's at many of our worst moments that God brings us His best. Why is that? Well, as Jesus Himself said, He came for the sick. It's only the sick who need a doctor. Let's put it this way. Only the sick need a doctor. Only people who are broken need healing. Only those who are missing a part of themselves need to be made whole. And only a humanity that is missing God needs God to become a human. Let me say that again. Only the sick need a doctor. Only the broken need healing. Only those missing a part of themselves need to be made whole. And only a humanity that is missing God needs God to become a human. You may or may not have had an amazing Christmas. It may have been everything you hoped for, but we don't actually need Christmas, our Christmas, to be amazing, for Christmas itself to be an amazing thing. You don't need to have received all the right presents or given all the right presents. You don't need to have cooked the best meal, ate just the right amount of food, drunk just the right amount of nice drink for Christmas to be an amazing thing in your life. And you don't need it to even be amazing for God to be a part of your life. And your life does not need to be amazing for God's presence to be a wonderful blessing for you. In fact, the only prerequisite that God seems to have for us as people is an acknowledgement that we aren't all we might present ourselves to be. That we are broken. That we are sick. That we are missing something important in ourselves. And that we are missing God. It's to those people who can admit these things that God comes and shows up. In the Christmas story, we have God clearly telling us that He is with us even when things aren't great. that God is present, that He is Emmanuel, and that it's not our situation, our circumstances, or how amazing we think we are that determines whether God is truly present and blessing us. John, when he was reflecting on his friend Jesus, who he knew and walked with and talked with, when he was talking about the birth of his friend Jesus, he said this: "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us." Not the Word became flesh and made everything perfect. Not the Word became flesh and dwelt among the people who were good enough. Not the Word became flesh and hung out with the elite. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So when we think about God with us, we think about God being with us in every moment of every day, no matter how we're going. God is with you in both your past and your future, when you were young and when you are old, when you're doing well and when you're not doing so well. And John shares with us that God is present in Jesus. When Jesus was trying to explain God to his disciples, John included, he said, "Well, if you've seen me, you've seen God." And so if you want to know what God is like and how God is seeking to interact with you and be with you, you can read how Jesus interacted with his disciples. You can read about how Jesus interacted with others. When John wrote about the Jesus he knew, he shared the amazing words we heard earlier. Out of his fullness we have all received grace in place of grace already given. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in closest relationship with the Father, has made him known. Jesus has made God known to us. And Jesus doesn't just give us grace or the grace we already had, but gives us more, gives us grace in place of grace already given. And then he goes on to say, Moses gave us the law, the rules, the method of life, the teaching. But then Jesus gives us something even better than the rules in this way of life. Jesus gives us something beyond that: grace and truth. This is what I rejoice in at Christmas. Not about how amazing Christmas may have been, but that God became a human, that God became my friend, and that my friend, my God, Jesus, is with me. This Christmas, and in your normal, everyday life, I pray that you may know the God who is with you, the God who became a human, the God who doesn't wait for your situation to be resolved, your problems to disappear, or even for you to be truly ready. He just loves you as you are and wants to be with you as things are, so that he can give you grace upon grace. May you know Jesus, God in the flesh, present with you today.